Alright, hi everyone. This is the third and final part of me detailing what everybody should know about the Epics and Omnibus by Marvel. So this will just be detailing other information people should know about these, specifically the new fans, like myself. So first up, talking about what they've done with the Star Wars Tales line of comics. As people should be aware, the Tales line had stories that either could be canon, are canon, definitely not canon, humorous stuff like that. So, one has to ask themselves, what did they do with the epics, with the Tales stuff? Well, thankfully, in Rise of the Sith Volume 1, they have a blurb at the beginning. Just Star Wars Tales numbers 1 to 2 begin with this introduction from editor Pete James as Pija Mobet, explaining that stories from Tales are of dubious canonicity, hollow movies that may or may not be accurate. The epic collections presume that each Tales story is relatively canonical in the Legends timeline and present them in their approximate chronological order, except for obvious parody and humor stories, which are presented at the back of the appropriate epic. And of course it goes on to have what the introduction by Pete James. Unfortunately, this is only in Rise of the Sith Volume 1. So if you decide to collect these out of, or at least start getting them and reading them without that in mind, you may be a little confused, but I would say it should be pretty obvious that the Tales comics that are in the back are supposed to be humorous, such as the one here. Anyways, so that's something to keep in mind. Despite a lot of the Tales stories being listed along with the other comics, they may still not be canon. Like it said, dubious canonicity. So they are collected in chronological order, which is nice, but just keep in mind that just because they're here doesn't mean they're canon. The Tales line of comics were secondary canon anyway, so just remember, if you have some weird continuity, it's just not canon. So going off of that, we got Visionaries, which was a graphic novel released, I want to say, back in the time of Revenge of the Sith. And that had a whole bunch of artists just coming up with these short little stories, some of which weren't even stories, they were just art pieces. And those, like Tales, are collected here, despite, as far as I'm aware, Visionaries being labeled as Infinities. But for those old-time fans, please let me know in the comment section below if I'm getting that wrong. But as far as I'm aware, all those stories were deemed non-canon. Or at least the story they decided to put in Empire Volume 4. Maybe you already know what I'm talking about. But one of those stories in Visionaries kinda inspired what happened in TCW. And I'm of course talking about the comic Old Wounds, where we saw for the first time Darth Maul alive with robot legs. And of course it also helped inspire what we saw in Rebels with him fighting Obi-Wan on Tatooine one last time. And of course, just trying to find it here. So, as you can see, Darth Maul has his chicken legs and long horns from when we first saw him in TCW, when they brought him back. Now, according to Wikipedia, this comic was certainly deemed non-canon. So, they don't make any kind of note about the canonicity of any of the Visionaries material. So, honestly, I would say just have all the Visionary stuff as non-canon unless it does fit, like what we're doing with Star Wars Tales. That comic in particular, Old Wounds, I really don't want it there because Darth Maul being alive, as much as I loved seeing him in TCW when that was coming out, it doesn't fit in Legends. And especially if you keep TCW in mind, this comic definitely doesn't make any sense, as Darth Maul specifically states that he's been hunting down Obi-Wan since after the Phantom Menace, and he was always behind him, like getting to Geonos, like Camino, Geonosis, following his trail but always behind him, which doesn't make any sense if we keep TCW in mind. Like, this acts as this is the first time they've met up since Phantom Menace. But still, as I said in my message to Disney Lucasfilm, let's just have TCW and all that material as secondary canon. So where does that leave Old Wounds? Non-canon like it originally was. Best to leave well enough alone there. So just keep in mind, Visionaries are dubious canon along with Tales, and if they just don't fit, they're not canon. Simple as that. Now, something I alluded to in the previous video about Clone Wars and TCW tie-in comics, such as Clone Wars Adventures, with the micro-series and then the tie-in stuff to TCW. I have no idea if and how these will be collected. Darth Maul Death Sentence was collected. And yeah, that doesn't have the TCW title on it, but it's a time comic. I mean, it has Savaggio Press in there, so I just count that as time comic and thus secondary canon. I don't care what anyone says at this point, it is secondary canon. But in terms of Clone Wars Adventures and the other TCW time comics, I don't know. From the looks of it, they're just collecting the mainline comics, you know, the mainline miniseries, you know, like Republic, and then the other miniseries, etc. They might possibly put all those tie-in comics into their own line of epics, which I think would be a neat idea, just to further separate the TCW from the rest of the EU. I mean, Clone Wars Adventures were just digest books, so those won't be enough to fit in one epic. At least that's what I'm thinking. I could be dead wrong there. And those stories take place throughout the Clone Wars era, so I'm surprised that they didn't just put those various stories across the epics. But, I don't know, if they want to save all those for one, like put them together, then sure, if that works. And now the webcomics. this is certainly an interesting topic. Something I didn't mention in the previous video is that Rise of the Sith Volume 1 collects the Prelude to Rebellion Issue 0, which up until then hadn't been collected, which is really nice. But what about the other webcomics? I mean, we got the TCW webcomics, which would go alongside the Time material. We got stuff like Evasive Action, Rookies, among others. And unfortunately, those haven't been collected for whatever reason, and you can't find them on Hyperspace or StarWars.com. So this would be a good way to collect them, especially since I'm sure not many people don't even know about these webcomics. I certainly didn't. Despite them practically being erased off of the internet due to the now debunked websites of Hyperspace and not being able to find them on StarWars.com, StarWarsTimeline.net, which is a really in-depth website of the chronology of the EU. So if you want to see the EU under a microscope, going through the chronology chapter by chapter of the novels, and then where the comics and everything else is placed, then I'd highly recommend it. Of course, it's not perfect, like trying to fit in TCW into the EU, which just doesn't work, but, well, there it is. StarWarsTimeline.net has archived all the webcomics, and even the translations of foreign stuff like the Spanish droids and Ewoks comics. I mean, just crazy stuff. And I mean, honestly, that's impressive right there. And honestly, I want to thank them for even going the extra mile there. I wouldn't worry about the Spanish or the other foreign comics, because as far as I'm aware, their canon status isn't known, or at least they just flat out aren't canon. So go to StarWarsTimeline.net, read all that stuff, because I don't know if any of that stuff is going to be collected. We got Prelude to Rebellion in Rise of the Sith, so hopefully. And so with all that in mind, with all the Marvel, Omnibus, and their epics, and then the stuff that collects the Dark Horse comics specifically, do I recommend them? Yes. As I said in the previous videos, for those who want to get into the EU and want to support getting new EU content, I highly recommend getting these epics and Omnibus. Just show Disney and Lucasfilm that we will buy stuff with the Legends banner. And just because, well, I'm talking about the comics now, as I said in my message video, issue 108. I bought issue 108, Disney Lucasfilm. I'm buying your epics. And as I showed earlier, I got your Omnibus. Stuff with the Legends banner sells. It shouldn't be that hard to comprehend. And while I would be more into getting new novels, yeah, you know, it's scratch that. I want everything. Comics, novels, animated films, and anime. But that's besides the point. The point is, comic sells. 108. Pretty much every fan of the EU bought at least one comic. Well, at least 2 comics, but I mean, I got other stuff to get, guys. I'm sorry. One was sufficient enough. So Disney Lucasfilm, I know you probably won't see these videos, but hopefully more people will do videos about their collections and trying to spread the word about what new fans should know about these. So, give us more legends. Alright guys, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if I missed anything or got anything wrong, please let me know. The last thing I want is to have false information and not have future viewers be clarified of it. But hopefully all will be well and my collection will have grown by the time we meet again. Alright, thanks for watching.